If you'll make what he tells you from this place in your heart, commit to it as God, because it is God, that's how he can be God to you. And if you'll hear this word, it'll tell you exactly how to follow God. I was thinking about how I could communicate this to someone else, how I could communicate this relationship. This was my train of thought. Lord, if people could just recognize this place for what it was, for really being you, and then commit themselves to this place. And I was thinking through that, and it's then when he gave me an answer, that's how I can be God to you. So the answer to how to do it was that's how. Committing to that place, believing that place that he flows to you from, committing to it as God. That's how he can lead you personally. That's how he can be your God. Now you go on living your life with God and looking to him for his influence, because look, he's leading you in your heart. He's telling you how to go in your heart. He's influencing how you should be in your heart. We can see that clearly in John 14, where he said, I and my Father will make our abode in him. When you love him, when you start to obey him and start to follow him, that's when he can kind of set up house. That's what that's talking about. That's when he can start establishing this connection, this relationship with you. That's how he does it. He does it through you following and you responding, okay? Through him leading and you responding to his leading. That's how he begins to set up house and make this stronger in you. It works that way. But he comes in immediately, as soon as you believe he is who he said he was. And how he can be God to you and become more God to you, not just God, but your God, okay, is as you continue in this relationship and it gets stronger and he sets up house and it becomes more and more well established in your heart and in your life. If you'll just make this place in you, this place where he flows from, to be as great as it really is, which is God himself speaking to you and flowing to you, and you exalt that as God in your life, then that's how he can be God to you directly and personally, and give you personal instruction and make supersede anything anyone else tells you. And it should, and he should, because nobody can be God for you. Only God can be God for you. He should be first before your pastor or your husband or your wife or some guy in your life who wants to exalt himself above God's influence and say, no, I'm God in your life. People do that. They do it sometimes even without knowing they do it. They don't know any better. Just give them the benefit of the doubt and just, ignore them. Don't think of them as purely evil, at least not yet. If you'll commit to what you hear from God in there. I know you got to know that it's God. I realize you got to go through a process to where you know God's voice and where you know it's God. But once you do, if you'll commit to that place, above all else, above all other influences, above me talking to you, above your pastor talking to you, I wouldn't say above the Bible, because never will the Bible disagree with what God would tell you in your heart. And that's a good way to know if it's not God, if it doesn't line up with the word somehow. But I encourage you, if you feel like that, you need to go study that word and make sure you're understanding it correctly. Especially when you're getting a leading from God in your heart that's saying something contrary to what the Bible is telling you. Maybe you don't understand the Bible that well. Maybe you need to go look at it again. And then go into that with God leading you in your heart to give you the understanding of what it really is talking about. Then you have some understanding. Then you have something to go on. But it should always agree with what God is telling you from your heart. But if you can commit to what God is telling you from your heart, that's how he can be God to you. So once again, let me say it one more time. I was looking to God and I was thinking this thought towards God. I was looking at him and I was saying, he trained me in this. I had learned he was in my heart, and I had learned how to look to him in the place in my heart where he lives and receive from him there. I was looking into that place and I was thinking about it. I was saying to God in my mind, if people could just commit to this place where you flow from, if they could commit to what comes from this place and then obey it like it was God. When you're obeying, say, that place as if it was God, you're actually obeying God. It's just trying to give you, or give me, any of us, a tangible way to know that it's God. Okay? So how do you know God is in your heart? Because if God has come to live in you, that's where he lives. In your heart, in your belly, he's at the center of you. How do I know that? Because where else would God be, for one thing? It's just ridiculous to think that he would be somewhere in the periphery. He's going to be right in the center of you, in your most truest part. Your most truest self is where he can touch you the best. That's where he is. He's not working his way into your heart. No, he's working his way from his heart out to the rest of you. This is why praying in tongues will help train you in this, okay? Because praying in tongues will help you locate this place where he's coming from. Now, we know from the word that he said that out of your belly will flow a river of living water when you believe on him. We know that God lives in your heart, the center of you. Praying in tongues will help train you for this. It's not an absolutely necessary step, but it will just help. This is one of those things that tongues really helps with. Because when you pray in tongues, you can feel the flow of God from your belly. Now, funny enough, when I think about it, I realized that back in the past, when I was just beginning praying in tongues, and I hadn't really gotten it solid in my life, no, I didn't feel that connection at that time. But when I learned to stop paying attention to the words that were coming out of my mouth from the tongue, and start paying attention to God inside my heart, then I really started to connect with him in there while I was praying in tongues. And that trained me to know the feel of him. And I know you might not hear anybody else say anything like that, or you might hear some people say that. You might think it sounds a little flaky. The only reason it's flaky is because it's so subjective. Okay? It's not actually flaky. It's actually a biblically based way to understand this. It's just something you won't see described even in the Bible too much. Because it's so subjective, because it's purely spiritual and purely internal. And, you know, most of the time, you know that when Jesus spoke, he didn't speak about things in a purely spiritual sense. Most of the time, he gave a physical representation, like a proverb, a parable, something that people could relate to in the natural. You might be saying, well, then why aren't you doing that? Well, Jesus did that part. I'm just trying to show you how this actually works, how this actually fits together. What did Jesus say? He said, out of your belly will flow a river of living water. We know that, right? And then even John, the very next verse, he goes along to try to interpret that a little bit for you. And that's biblically inspired. That's spiritually inspired word when he said, when Jesus was speaking about this river of living water, he was speaking of his spirit. So we know that. So you see what I mean by saying that you can interpret this stuff. You can interpret the spiritual interpretation of these material examples. And you got to also keep in mind that Jesus also didn't get into this too much, because he told the apostles, he told them before he went to the cross, he said, look, you can't understand a lot of this right now. You can't hear a lot of this right now. But when the Holy Spirit comes, he will show it all to you. He'll explain this stuff to you. So you see, you can't really understand it or even know where I'm coming from until you start to have an experience with it. And that's what it comes down to. That's why this is something that you don't see talked about a lot, because this is something you only understand with experience. Where do I get experience to begin with to be able to understand it? Well, that's just it. That's the wonderful thing about God. He has already translated himself into you in all of his fullness, all of his glory, and put himself in your heart. He's already done that. So there's the experience, the required experience that you must have in order to understand and partake of this wonderful relationship. We rely on that and we build from there. Once you get familiar with God, once you get to know how he feels in you, and once you get to past the point where you're doubting what you're hearing, you know, because you can get past that point with experience. You don't have to be quite so desperate where it doesn't have to be like you're just clutching for anything that can help you, because I know about that, because that's the way it feels a lot of times when you're in church and you're new, is that you're like clutching for anything that can help you to really truly relate to what's being said, truly to understand the mystery of Jesus in you, the greatness of God and how it works. And, so many times what happens when you're in church and you're new like that, you fall back on this whole idea, well, as long as you're doing what you're supposed to be doing and you're being a good little Christian, well, then you're doing enough, and God saves you and everything, and you're all right as long as you're following the rules. And that sounds really good, and it's comforting to think that that was true, and there's truth to it. Now, I'm not saying that you're not okay as long as you're following. If you're following the rules, look, you're in a good place. If you're doing what you're supposed to do, I mean, you're being a good little Christian, you're going to church regularly, you're in a good place. There's nothing wrong with that. But I'm going to tell you right now, it's not the ultimate. It's not the way God wanted you to relate to him. I mean, yes, he wants you to go to church. I don't mean that. But he doesn't require that you go to church. I don't go to church right now. Okay, that doesn't mean I shouldn't, but I'm just not right now. I'm doing this, okay? But relating to him through following rules is an inferior way to relate to God. The superior way to relate to God, and the way that he really wanted it from the very beginning, was that you know him in your heart and you follow him just like he's leading you by the hand. Okay? Only he's leading you by the heart. Leading you by the series of things that he influences you to do, you to say, you to think in your heart. That's a better way to relate to God, and it's actually the right way. If you've given your life over to God, that's the way he's going to return the favor. You give your life to God, and he gets in there in your heart, and he gets a hold of you, and he says, look here, look at me. Look to me. Here, I have it for you right here. Here's the answers. Here's the keys. And you look to him there, and you receive from him there. That's how he can be God to you. That's how he can show you. That's how he can lead you and direct you. And that's what we want. We want the leading and directing that comes directly from God. We want that because the leading and directing that comes from man is not sufficient. It's not enough. It's, once again, trying to relate to God through obeying his rules. But even though God gave us rules in the Old Testament and gave us laws, the commandments, that's not the ultimate way that he wants you to follow him. I can tell you that emphatically, because otherwise, why would he say in 2 Corinthians 3, for example, the glory of righteousness, the ministration of righteousness, has done away with the ministration of death, which was through the law. Well, why does it call it the ministration of death? Because if you don't do what the law says, you die. Because you've been forgiven, it is now the ministration of righteousness. You are made righteous through believing that Jesus was enough to save you from your sin. That's what makes you righteous. It's a gift to you. You're now righteous through what he did. Now, you don't do anything to earn that righteousness, and you don't have to worry about it anymore. Now you go on living your life with God and looking to him for his influence, and you don't have to think about trying to follow a law anymore, because look, he's leading you in your heart. He's telling you how to go in your heart. He's influencing how you should be in your heart. That's your law now. It's your law, and it's much better than any law that's written down on a piece of paper or on a stone. Can you see that? It's so simple. The law of the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus in your heart has made you free from the law of sin and death. It's made you free from it. Because he'll lead you in the heart, because you can listen in your heart, because you now have the image of God placed in your heart, and you can look to him to see whether or not you match. It's that simple. You no longer have to look to the law. You can look directly into God to see whether or not you match his image. And if you see something that's not the same, then you know, oh, I'm not godly there. I need your help, God. And guess what he'll do? He'll address it. He'll address it immediately, and look, this is the important part. This is how it works so well. He'll address it in exactly the way you need him to address it, so that you can understand, so that you can change, so that you can follow him into this better picture of who he is reflected through you. That's what you want. That's what it's about. That is your new way to follow God. If you'll make what he tells you from this place in your heart, commit to it as God, because it is God, that's how he can be God to you. That's how he can lead you. That's what I'm here to tell you about today. The great thing about this is, wow, you can relax. I hope I've gotten my point across to you. And if I have, then now I can relax. Because if you'll realize that all you got to do is commit to that place and receive what God has to say to you from there, well, there's no more struggle left. You know, the doubting is over. The wondering if you're doing it right is over. Because you know who you're following. You know him personally now. Because you know him in your heart. It might take some doing to get there. To get to that point where you have that kind of confidence in him. But it's just... I just know. I'm just picturing myself when I was in your place. I'm assuming at this point, to people who are having trouble getting there or have had trouble getting there, people who aren't mature in their real confidence in God yet, and you're trying to get to the place where you know that this is God that you're speaking to in your heart. You know, there are some of you, I hope, out there who are past that point, who have got the fullness of a revelation where you know it's God. I mean, you absolutely know it's God. And I want to challenge you, please. If you're one of those people, please comment to me in the comments of this video so that we can know. Because this is the thing. I feel like that there aren't that many people out there with that kind of absolute assurance. Okay? You might know it in your head, but I'm talking about knowing it through experience. I feel like there's not. But I want to think that that's just because they don't often speak. It's that those who know aren't saying, it's because you're so comfortable with it, and you got it down, honestly, and you just don't need to talk about it. And I get that, but I'm asking you to do that for this video, to show us that there's more people out there who are like me, who have an absolute certainty that they know who God is in them. I mean, I know there are plenty of you out there who have a sure and certain knowledge of Jesus. Whether or not you necessarily have a sure and certain knowledge of what I'm talking about at this time, about, you know, connecting with him in your heart and knowing him as God in your heart. I know that you have a sure and certain knowledge of Jesus. Please tell me about that too, and please make the differentiation as well. I know that you do, because I've had a sure and certain knowledge of Jesus ever since I first came to him and got my first taste, right, that he was the real thing. You see, that's what it comes down to, is when you get that taste that he's the real thing. Look, you're beyond doubt there. And all those lies that people say out in the world that contradict, you know, God's account of things in the Bible. And they'll say, well, you know, but once you get a real taste of truth, you realize, oh, but whatever you all say, if it contradicts what's in the Bible, I'm going to believe the Bible. You probably have that. Many of you will have that understanding. Many of you will have that belief system set and stable in your life. So you know what I'm talking about when it comes to where you get to the point where you know you believe it because you've grown up. Well, you can get to that point also with knowing this voice that comes from God, with knowing his influence, knowing that it's God. If you got any questions, please ask me those in the comments, because I will definitely answer those in the next video, if you will. Because I'm trying to give you this in a simple way so that you can apply it. But if you are having trouble applying it, please let me know, because I want to help you apply it. That's what I'm here for. I want to help you apply and not just give you a lot of glowing testimonials about how great God is and how great it is to follow God. I'm getting to the point where I'm tired of the sound of my own voice when I keep talking about these things, and I'm not giving you something that you can actually use and work with. So that's where I am right now. And that's why I want to get past this point to a point where I can give you something super solid. Not just you, but other people out there. If I can get this thing honed down to a message where people can use it, that's good. That's what we want to get out there. And people will respond to that. Believe God like this to know your destiny. That's in this next video. I talk about knowing God as you go and how you do that and how it works. See you soon.